It's been a big year for trade, but is trade starting to slow? Welcome to the call. I'm Jay Sapsford. The world's economic focus has been on tariffs, inflation, and fluctuating demand. But those factors are often shaped by the flow of goods through the world's dockyards. Across the nation, inventories remain high, purchase orders are often delayed, and the signals coming ahead of China's New Year are murky at best. So our question today, is slowing port traffic a red flag? Joining us now to answer all of our questions is Gene Seroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles. Gene, welcome to the call.
Good to see you, Jay. Thank you.
Now, you run the biggest port in the Western Hemisphere. Given your vantage point, you're in a position to forecast as much as any economist. So what do you see right now, and what is your forecast for the economic activity in 2026?
Well, Jay, I think you said it best. It's quite murky. What we've seen over the past 18 months or so are just ups and downs in global trade. First, it was the talk of tariffs and trade policy that had some advancing inventories to try to build stocks. Then, since January, we've had more than 110 announcements emanating from Washington on that policy, tariffs, and when hard tariffs came into play and strong policy was announced, cargo volume really dipped. And then when that policy was softened and deadlines extended, we saw windows of opportunity that importing companies took advantage of. Now we sit at the end watching for retail holiday sales, factory output numbers, industrial production, and they're a bit jumpy as well, waiting for those numbers to come in. Overall, as you rightly said, and even according to the St. Louis Fed, who monitors the inventory sales ratio very closely, we've got a little bit of elevated stock still. We don't have a lot of empty shelves. We don't have the calamity that some talked about earlier in the year. But looking forward, there are pressure points on consumer prices, inflation numbers, and company margins.
I wonder if we might be able to address the stakes in all of this, particularly for the local economy there in Los Angeles. How many jobs are impacted by what goes on in your operation there?
The stakes are huge nationally, regionally, and right here at home. In the city of Los Angeles, 1 in 15 jobs for Angelenos working today. In a city of 4 million people, 1 in 15 jobs emanate from this port. In the region, which has about 20 million of us, across Southern California, 1 in 9 jobs begins here at the port. That's 1 million folks who go to work every day, counting on us to do our jobs. And it's 1 in 52 nationwide. The cargo that traverses our port reaches not only all 50 states, but each and every one of our 435 congressional districts. This is truly a conversation of national significance.
So you mentioned the uncertainty and that impact of those more than 100 policy changes over the course of the years. How does that turn up in the flow of traffic as you see it?
Oh, it's been a roller coaster of a year, and I don't think we're done yet. What we saw in April, soon as the big announcements came out on tariffs, that a lot of folks just slammed on the brakes and stopped buying because they didn't know if another announcement would follow in 2 hours, 2 days, or 2 weeks that would change the thinking on how we import and export. And sure enough, they were right. Soon as those policies were softened, we saw a run in the back half of June and for the month of July that created a deluge of cargo. Yet over the 12 months ending in July, we moved more cargo here at the Port of Los Angeles than we did during the peak of COVID, and not one ship was backed up. That really shows the partnership between the import and export community and our logistics service providers, the ports. And of course, it's those great dock workers, the women and men here on the ground every day moving that cargo, along with the trucking firms and the railroads that kept America's economy moving, even when we didn't know what was coming next from a policy perspective.
We're throwing up a chart here that tells a pretty interesting story about your port. Year to date, that's January through October, port traffic is actually up on the year over 2024. Now that puts LA within striking distance of that 10 billion container mark that you've reached a couple of times already. But the October numbers are softening, down 6% on the year, and it's a little steeper at your neighbor there at Long Beach. So how do we square this? Is this just volatility, or is it a more worrisome sign of flagging demand in the U.S. economy?
Well, as some would say, in the real estate business, it's all about the comps. And that elevated level of cargo that's been moving over the past 18 months because of those policy statements that either were anticipated or actually did come down the line, then subsequently changed, really influenced how much cargo came in to pad those inventories. So we're looking at a really big fourth quarter of 2024 in comparison. You're over that psychological 800,000 TEU mark for the month of October. It's pretty solid across the board. We had great output from our dock workers. Jobs were filled, truck gates were moving, and the dwell times, or the time a container sits before it moves in and out of the port, is at pre-pandemic lows. Now, we'll see coming up here in the month of November that will be off just a little bit as well compared to those higher numbers recorded last year. But here's what I look at. Compared to the 5-year rolling average, we're just about where we've been. And that takes into account all the ups and downs that we've witnessed during that time. So all in all, I don't see us falling off a cliff. And as a leading economic indicator for the United States, that's pretty good news right now, given all that we've gone through.
Just a question about how you operate the docks there. The front loading causes cargo surges. How do you manage that? And how were you able to keep up with that without causing shortages?
Well, one, I would say we learned a lot from the COVID era. You may recall, Jay, that at the peak of the peak, and it is etched in my mind, on January 9th of 2021, we had 109 container vessels at anchor off the shores of the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. Cargo wasn't moving. There were bottlenecks, and man, oh man, were people upset about how this supply chain grinded to a halt. And what we found through our own system and research and data mining was that cargo that sat for 8 days would likely sit for weeks on end beyond that. And it was simply because warehouses were full. We were ordering just in case as opposed to just in time. The American consumer was buying online at a pace never seen before, and curbside pickup at retail stores became a family outing because we couldn't go and travel to see grandma. We couldn't go to ball games or out to restaurants. So it was a very different time period. But during this go around, we leaned on each other, took some of the learnings from that, what went right, what went wrong, and how better could we plan. It was about early information. And now our port community system, the Port Optimizer, sees cargo 40 days before it lands on a vessel in Los Angeles. That gives us ample time to plan that great skilled labor, the land needed, and the machinery to move all that cargo. Having better dialogue on a more regular basis across the supply chain also helps us see around corners and over hills before problems really happened. And that shows up in the daily report. I receive a one-pager on the port's vital statistics every morning. And I can tell you now, with rail dwell times below 3 days, with rail aging cargo in triple-digit fashion, we've never seen fluidity at the ports like we have now. But it's all been based on these strong relationships that have been built over the years and using data to help us understand better how we prepare on the ground. Great credit to all those involved.
It's a fascinating insight to how your business operates. You know, you mentioned the COVID era, the challenges that we all faced during that time. Now, it seems like geopolitics is playing a different role, but equally as disruptive to operations or potentially disruptive. I wonder what your take on that is. Is geopolitics now a greater concern than even some of the economic questions that we face?
Now, it certainly looms large every day. And when I talk to companies, both here in the U.S. and overseas, I've made 5 foreign trips in the last 10 weeks alone, trying to make sure our relationships were strong and understand what companies are thinking about right now and how they're planning for year 2026. I still come up on companies that are telling me they spend an inordinate amount of time on simulation. If this policy goes in, if that cost rises, if sourcing must move, what does it all mean? Spending all this time on prediction as opposed to the operations and conveyance of their supply chains. But what we've seen is this. Since the first trade policy changes back in 2018, the Get Tough on China plan, we saw our business here at the Port of Los Angeles change dramatically. At that point in 18, 60% of our portfolio was trade with China. Today, it's 40% and dropping. Yet, we've still grown. Liner shipping companies have put nonstop services in from Southeast Asia because that speed component is so essential to our plan here in Los Angeles. And we've been running around trying to capture every pound of freight we can, driving those relationships to higher levels, showing what value we can deliver collectively with our partners, and making sure that we're attuned to the needs of the import and export community. On the
Okay.
export side of the business, it's a little different story. Not only have we witnessed retaliatory tariffs in some cases, but other trading nations are making deals without the United States, which will be impactful for months and possibly years to come.
Well, you've raised a lot of issues that I'd love to follow up on, but let me go to some of our member questions here. A couple of China questions here. China dominates buildings of ships, containers, and cranes. It is also one of the biggest fleet operators. Are we vulnerable to China using this dominance as a choke point or leverage in trade negotiations?
Well, I'd say that any dominating role that a trading nation, a company, or even a pro football team has to be proliferated. But more competition can mean better quality of products, better prices, and a better system of conveyance. So having that angle on this is great, but it's going to be a decades-long approach in some cases. U.S. shipbuilding and its renewed efforts of strategy may yield some positive outcomes, but you have to do a couple things. One, a sector-specific review to see how we're going to approach this. Today, the two dominant shipyards in the United States primarily cater to the U.S. military and have a backlog of about 250 vessels. Adding to that also has a concern when it comes to the skilled workforce. Today, according to the National Association of Manufacturers, we have more than 414,000 manufacturing jobs open today. So whether it's a question of reshoring manufacturing or renewing the shipbuilding industry, where do you acquire the talent? How do you attract, recruit, and retain the folks that need to go into this sector, and what's the mechanism to train them in this highly skilled area? And then thirdly, what's the geography question? And where are you going to place these supply chains at their center point and for their tiered suppliers so they have access to rail, road connectivity, as well as our seaports? This is a long way to go. The last container ship that was built in the United States recently was about 6 times the cost of one that's built in Asia. We've got some distance to cover here.
So should we be subsidizing the industry as some of our competitors are?
That's a lot of money. And when we've heard the administration talk about de-emphasizing public investment and trying to rally the private sector, that also needs further study. We look at the shoreside cranes, where China has a very, very dominant role in the manufacture and placement across ports around the world. Here in the United States, we have about 200 cranes that were built in China. At the Port of Los Angeles, about 45% of our 86 cranes were built in China here as well. Now, again, you've got to have price points that make sense. You've got to have quality, and it's kind of difficult to unwind decades worth of supply chain expertise right now. During my trips to China over the last several months, what I've heard is not only that China's focused on exporting goods to the world, they're also exporting their manufacturing expertise to other nations as well. So we've got a wide patch here that we've got to evaluate. Nothing will be left behind by American ingenuity. Well, we've got to get to the task.
Okay, well, that mention of cranes gets to another one of our member questions here. China's ZPMC, a state-owned company, makes 70% of the world's port cranes, as you mentioned. Given they use Chinese software and communication devices, does Mr. Seroka see those cranes as a national security concern?
I think national security has got to be front of mind to all of us every single day. Now, what we have witnessed is through an executive order of the President of the United States a year ago, August, there was a complete evaluation by the National Security Council, and Neuberger led that investigation across the country in evaluating these cranes. And while nothing alarming was turned up, we've got to keep our sights set on what protects American interests at all times. But knowing that 80% of trade moves on water with the United States, it's vital that we keep these relationships strong, make sure we manage our area, just like trading nations will manage theirs, but in the middle, there's a whole world of opportunity in front of us.
You mentioned that fascinating statistic about how Chinese origin goods are actually down while overall trade activity is up. Does that suggest that the Chinese are actually shipping through third countries, so-called transshipments?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think so from the observer's eye. Here's what really takes place. Across the supply chain in Asia, because countries are separated by water, you'll see piece goods, parts, and components move from country A to country B for final assembly and export to consuming nations. That's been traditional over the last 50 years. What we're also seeing is China's investment in third countries to build up manufacturing facilities, supply chain capabilities, and transport networks across the world. You may remember the Belt and Road concept, which is still front and center in the 15th five-year plan of China, announced just last month in Beijing. So there's a lot to take in here. Now, there are some areas that the U.S. Trade Rep has announced on additional tariffs for cargo that seems to be going around traditional origin destination pairs, but there's a lot more to it in the supply chain than just trying to skirt tariff issues.
Now, something you said recently on another program caught my attention. I'm asking Scott to put the quote up here on the screen. Now, this speaks to the use of technology. And as you know, last year, technology and the increased use of technology in ports was caused a bit of tension over on the East Coast. So let me just read this quote. A mechanic who used to use a wrench to fix equipment will now have to use a computer. I just wonder what you mean by that and how this speaks to the increased use of technology in your operations.
Well, it's interesting. When we take our cars into the shop now, most of the work on those cars is done digitally, whether it's a battery electric like I have or a traditional internal combustion engine. The technology has advanced so much that the wiring in an American car now is more than 4 miles long. So technology is really taking leaps and bounds into the future right in front of our eyes. Here at the ports, the subject of automation or robotics on port terminals is the most polarizing discussion in our industry. And while in our case, across the 29 ports on the west coast of the United States, rules of engagement were laid out in a federally sanctioned collective bargaining agreement back in 2008, we here in the city and Port of Los Angeles have made one very clear statement. Even with technology moving at lightning speed, we cannot leave the worker behind. Recognizing what technology is available and how to make sure the workforce is in the middle of these advances is key. That's why, along with the Port of Long Beach and the California Workforce Development Board, the Port of Los Angeles is helping build the nation's first goods movement training campus. Think of that. 250 years old, the strongest economy in the world, and now we're getting to the training of the people that move all the products for American consumers and factories. And our job is this, to make sure that if you're of my vintage and you want to be competitive in the workplace for the next 10 or 15 years, we've got to upskill and reskill you to the coming technology. If you're in the middle of the career and want to make sure you have all the skills necessary, this training campus will be for you. And if you're a young person that wants to join this industry, we'll have a storefront with counselors. We'll be working with high schools, community colleges, and four-year universities to attract these folks down to the port area and match their skill sets or ambitions with the needs of this port complex. We need naval architects, marine experts, all the way to people who are working on the equipment, who move the cargo so well for us, to administrators like myself. We've got to be active in making sure people understand how important this industry is and how we can train them up. Now, on the question of where technology leaves the workforce, not only is training a piece of this, but more cargo is too. Here at the Port of Los Angeles, the math is simple. Every 4 containers create a job, even in this technology-driven environment. Over my time here at the Port of Los Angeles, the dock workers' jobs are up 21%. I wish they were 41% increased. But we've got to keep getting after this every day, bringing more cargo, delivering more value to the import and export community, and driving more economic value right here at home and across the country.
Fascinating. As the final question for you, Gene, I'm going to give one of our members the last word here. What gives you hope that 2026 might be a little less uncertain?
Well, I think we're heading into midterm elections, so folks will want to get their platforms prepared, get the voters on their side, and get interest in what is the greatest nation and the largest economy in the world. We'll continue to persevere, and we've got to do our job to help drive that economy. And that's what I'm most proud of, is all the work that we've done. From members like yours at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to the import export community, those service providers, and the great workforce here at home and across the nation that help deliver the goods to the American consumer and factory. We've got much more to do, and we know that very well, but I am really bullish on America to come.
Well, we deeply appreciate your insights today and shedding light on this important story. Gene Seroka, Executive Director at the Port of Los Angeles, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jay. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Our audience has gotten their shot of informational espresso and is ready to tackle the day. Missed a live episode? Catch the replay on our website, LinkedIn, or on YouTube. You can also listen to the Call's podcast edition on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to our members for joining us. This has been The Call, brought to you by the Global Intelligence Desk, asking the right questions to navigate uncertain times.